I never thought I'd be the kind of guy who would find himself in this situation. For most of my life, I believed in the basics: loyalty, love, and commitment. I believed that if you treated someone right, if you were a good husband, things would just work out. That's how it was supposed to be, right? You meet someone, fall in love, get married, and live happily ever after. That's what I thought I had with Luna. Luna and I, we had a storybook start. We met through mutual friends, and from the moment I saw her, I was hooked. She was everything I ever wanted. Smart, beautiful, funny. We clicked right away, and before long, we were inseparable. It felt like a dream come true. We dated for a couple of years before I finally worked up the nerve to propose. She said yes, and I was on top of the world. Our marriage was good. At least that's what I believed. Sure, we had our ups and downs like any couple, but I always thought we were solid. I trusted Luna completely. We had this unspoken bond, this understanding that we were in it together, no matter what. I prided myself on being the kind of husband who supported his wife, who made sure she knew she was loved. I never doubted her loyalty, not for a second. But if there was one thing I feared deep down, it was the idea of betrayal. I mean, who doesn't? The thought that the person you've given your heart to might not feel the same way, that they might be hiding something from you, was something I couldn't even let myself consider. But I didn't need to worry about that with Luna. She was my rock, my partner in everything. Or at least, that's what I kept telling myself. I was convinced that our life together was as close to perfect as it could get. We had our routines, our little traditions, and I found comfort in that. I was sure that we were heading towards that dream of growing old together, of finding happiness in the everyday moments. I believed that loyal, loving women like Luna were out there, and that I had found one. But as much as I didn't want to admit it, there was always that nagging doubt at the back of my mind, a fear that maybe, just maybe, things weren't as perfect as they seemed. But I pushed it aside, convinced that Luna would never betray me. After all, we were happy. We were solid, or so I thought. I remember the day things started to feel different. It was just an ordinary afternoon, and I was chatting with Mr. Johnson, our neighbor. He's the kind of guy who notices everything, always has a story or a piece of gossip to share. We were talking about the usual weather, neighborhood stuff, when he suddenly mentioned seeing Luna at a cafe the other day. He said she was with some guy he didn't recognize. He didn't say it in a mean way, just kind of offhand, like it was no big deal. At first, I didn't think much of it. Luna's got friends, colleagues, and she's always been social. I brushed it off, told myself it was probably just work-related or something harmless. But as the day went on, Mr. Johnson's comment kept echoing in my mind. Why didn't I recognize the guy? Why hadn't she mentioned it? Over the next few days, I started to notice little things I hadn't paid attention to before. Luna was working late more often, coming home tired and distracted. She seemed more guarded with her phone, keeping it close, turning the screen away when I walked by. I told myself I was being paranoid, that it was just my mind playing tricks on me because of what Mr. Johnson said. But it wasn't just the phone. She was more distant, not in a blatant way, but I could feel it. We used to talk about everything, but now our conversations felt different. She wasn't as open, as present. I'd ask her how her day was, and she'd give me these vague answers, like she was on autopilot. I wanted to believe it was just stress from work, that she was tired, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. One night, I reached for her hand while we were watching TV, and she pulled away, saying she was just adjusting her position. It was a small thing, but it hit me hard. We used to hold hands all the time. Suddenly, Those little moments that I'd always taken for granted started to feel like signs. Signs that maybe Mr. Johnson was right, that maybe there was something or someone I didn't know about. I tried to push these thoughts out of my head, but the more I tried, the more they kept coming back. I found myself second-guessing everything, replaying our recent interactions, looking for clues that maybe weren't even there. Was I overthinking it? Was I letting a harmless comment mess with my mind? Or was there something real behind this growing unease? I didn't want to believe it. I wanted to trust her, to trust in what we had. But that seed of doubt had been planted, and no matter how much I tried to ignore it, it was starting to take root. After that conversation with Mr. Johnson, things didn't feel the same. The more I tried to shake off what he said, the more it clung to me like a bad smell. I didn't want to believe it. I couldn't believe it. This was Luna we were talking about, the woman I had married, the one I thought I knew better than anyone. But the doubts, they started creeping in, no matter how much I fought them. Every little thing began to seem like a sign. Luna's late nights at work, her guardedness with her phone, even the way she seemed more distant. All of it started to add up in my mind. But then I'd catch myself and feel guilty. How could I even think that way about her? We had a good marriage. We trusted each other, or at least I trusted her. So why was I letting this eat away at me? I'd lie in bed at night, staring at the ceiling, trying to convince myself that I was overreacting. I'd tell myself that it was just stress, that she was probably going through something at work that she didn't want to burden me with. But even as I tried to rationalize it, there was this gnawing feeling in my gut that wouldn't go away. The worst part was, I couldn't talk to her about it. How could I? What was I supposed to say? Hey honey, I'm starting to think you might be cheating on me because Mr. Johnson saw you with some guy at a cafe. It sounded ridiculous even in my head. I didn't want to come across as insecure or accusatory, but the longer I stayed silent, the more these thoughts festered. There were moments when I'd catch her looking at me and I'd wonder, does she know? Does she know that I'm doubting her? And then I'd feel terrible because deep down, I wanted to believe that she was still the same woman I married, that she wasn't capable of betraying me. But how could I ignore what I was seeing? The signs were there, or at least I thought they were. I started paying closer attention to everything. When she was out, I'd check the time, note how long she was gone. I hated myself for it, for turning into someone I didn't recognize. I was becoming suspicious, paranoid even, and I despised feeling that way. But I couldn't stop. It was like a part of me needed to find something, needed to prove whether I was right to feel this way or if I was just losing my mind. At the same time, there was this voice in my head telling me to stop, telling me that if I kept digging, if I kept letting these doubts control me, I might destroy something that was perfectly fine. What if it was all in my head? What if I was pushing her away with my suspicions, creating a problem where there wasn't one? I was stuck in this vicious cycle, and no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't break free from it. Some days, I'd convince myself that everything was fine, that Luna and I were just going through a rough patch like any couple does. I'd focus on the good times, on the memories we'd made together, and I'd feel a sense of relief. But it never lasted. That nagging doubt would always creep back in, stronger than before. I was torn between two worlds. One, where Luna was still my loyal wife, the woman I loved and trusted, and another, where she was hiding something from me, something that could shatter everything we had built. The more I struggled to find the truth, the more lost I felt. And the worst part was, I didn't know which world was real. All I knew was that the uncertainty was eating me alive. It all came crashing down one night, when I least expected it. I was at home, sitting on the couch, flipping through channels, trying to find something to distract myself from the whirlwind of thoughts that had been consuming me. Luna was out again, another late night at work, or so she said. I was trying my best to believe her, to push those nagging doubts out of my mind, but it was getting harder every day. My phone buzzed, and for a moment, I thought about ignoring it, but something told me to check it. I picked it up, and there it was, an unfamiliar number with a text message. I almost didn't open it, but curiosity got the better of me. The message was short, just a few words, but they hit me like a ton of bricks. Your wife is at the hotel with him right now, room 214. My heart stopped. I stared at the screen, my mind racing. Who could have sent this? Why? But more than that, a part of me already knew. I had to see for myself. I don't remember grabbing my keys or walking out the door. It was like I was on autopilot. My mind was a blur, a mix of fear, anger, and desperation. The drive to the hotel felt like a lifetime. My hands were gripping the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white. I kept telling myself that this couldn't be real, that there had to be some mistake. But that nagging doubt, the one that had been eating away at me for weeks, was now screaming in my head. What if it was true? What if everything I had feared was happening right now? I pulled into the parking lot, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't know what I was going to do, what I was going to say. All I knew was that I had to see for myself. I walked into the hotel, my legs feeling like they were made of lead, every step taking more effort than the last. When I reached room 210, I stood there for what felt like an eternity. My hand was trembling as I raised it to knock on the door. A part of me wanted to turn around and leave, to pretend that this wasn't happening, that I wasn't about to uncover the truth that could destroy everything. But I couldn't. I had to know. I knocked, and for a moment, there was silence. Then I heard footsteps, and the door slowly opened. Luna stood there, her eyes wide with shock, and behind her, a man I didn't recognize. They both froze, and in that moment, everything I had been trying to deny came crashing down around me. I felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me. The woman I had loved, the woman I had trusted with everything, had betrayed me. I couldn't speak. I couldn't think. All I could do was stand there, staring at them, feeling my heart shatter into a million pieces. Luna tried to speak, to explain, but I didn't want to hear it. What could she possibly say that would make any of this better? The betrayal was written all over her face, in the way she looked at me, with a mixture of guilt and fear. And the man, he just stood there, awkward and silent, as if he didn't know what to do. I turned and walked away. I couldn't stay there, couldn't listen to whatever excuses she had. My mind was a whirlwind of emotions, anger, hurt, disbelief. I drove home in a daze, not even sure how I managed to get there. All I knew was that the life I thought I had, the marriage I believed in, was over. When I got home, I sat in the dark, replaying everything in my mind. Every late night, every distant look, every excuse she had ever given. It all made sense now, but that didn't make it any easier to accept. The pain was overwhelming, like a physical weight pressing down on my chest, making it hard to breathe. I had always feared this moment, but nothing could have prepared me for the reality of it. I felt like a fool, like I had been living in a lie. The woman I had vowed to spend the rest of my life with had betrayed me in the worst possible way, and there was no going back. The trust was gone, shattered beyond repair. As I sat there in the darkness, I realized that my life had just changed forever. The future I had imagined with Luna was gone, and I didn't know what was left. All I knew was that I was standing at the edge of a void, and I had no idea what was going to happen next. In the days that followed, I was a mess. My mind was a battlefield, torn between conflicting emotions and thoughts. On one hand, I was furious at Luna for betraying me, for shattering the trust I had in her, for destroying the life we had built together. On the other hand, there was this deep, aching sadness, a part of me that didn't want to let go of what we had, that couldn't believe it was all over. I couldn't stop thinking about that moment at the hotel, replaying it over and over in my mind. But now, I was faced with the most difficult question of all. What do I do next? Do I stay and try to work things out? Or do I leave and start over? The thought of either option made me sick to my stomach. Staying would mean confronting the betrayal head-on, trying to rebuild something that had been utterly destroyed. But how could I ever trust her again? How could I look at her the same way, knowing what she had done? And yet the idea of walking away from everything we had, our home, our memories, the life we had shared, felt just as unbearable. I thought about the vows we had made, the promises to love and support each other, no matter what. I had always believed that marriage was something worth fighting for, that love could conquer anything. But this was different. This wasn't just a fight or a rough patch. This was betrayal, and it cut deeper than anything I had ever felt before. My pride was also at play. Part of me didn't want to be the guy who couldn't keep his marriage together, who let his wife's betrayal define him. There was a stubbornness in me that wanted to prove that I could fix this, that I could make it work despite everything. But another part of me, the part that was tired, hurt, and broken, wondered if it was even worth it. I spent countless nights lying awake, weighing the pros and cons, trying to figure out what the right thing to do was. I thought about how people would see me, about the judgment I might face if I walked away. Would they see me as weak, as a failure, or would they understand that sometimes enough is enough? I tried to imagine a future where Luna and I could move past this, where we could somehow rebuild the trust that had been shattered. But every time I pictured it, I felt this deep, hollow emptiness. The connection we once had, the bond that held us together, was gone, and I didn't know if it could ever be restored. On the other hand, the thought of leaving terrified me. What would my life look like without Luna? We had been together for so long that I could barely remember what it was like to be on my own. Starting over felt impossible, like a mountain too steep to climb. And then there was the loneliness, the fear of being alone, of not finding happiness again, of living the rest of my life with this pain. I started reaching out to friends, people I trusted, looking for advice, for someone to tell me what to do. But no one could make the decision for me. They all said the same thing. You have to do what's right for you. But how was I supposed to know what that was? The more I thought about it, the more I realized that neither option was going to be easy. Whether I stayed or left, there would be pain, loss, and a long road ahead. I wasn't sure if I was strong enough to face it, but I knew that whatever I chose, it would define the rest of my life. As much as I wanted to find a clear answer, a solution that would make everything right again, I knew deep down that it didn't exist. This was my reality now, and I had to find a way to navigate it. The decision was mine alone, and I was the only one who could make it. In the end, I realized that it wasn't just about what I could live with. It was about what I couldn't live without. And as much as it tore me apart, I knew that I couldn't live with the betrayal, the lies, the constant doubt. I couldn't live in a world where I was always questioning, always wondering if it would happen again. So, I made my decision. It was the hardest thing I've ever done, but I knew it was the only way to start healing, to start finding myself again. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew that I couldn't keep living in the past. And as painful as it was, I knew that sometimes the only way to move forward is to let go. After making the decision to leave, I felt a strange mix of emotions: relief, sadness, fear. It was like a weight had been lifted, but at the same time, the reality of what I was facing hit me hard. I knew I couldn't do it alone. I needed support, someone to talk to, someone who could help me make sense of everything that was happening. So I turned to the people I trusted most: my friends and family. The first person I called was my best friend, Mark. We've known each other since college, and he's always been the one I could count on, no matter what. I remember sitting in my car, just outside the house, feeling like I was about to break apart. When Mark answered the phone, I couldn't even get the words out at first, but he knew something was wrong. "Matt, what's going on?" he asked, his voice full of concern. I told him everything. I didn't hold back. The affair, the confrontation, the decision to leave, it all came pouring out. And Mark, he just listened. He didn't interrupt, didn't offer advice right away. He just let me vent, let me get it all off my chest. When I finally finished, there was a long silence on the other end of the line. "Matt," he finally said, "I'm so sorry, man. I can't imagine what you're going through, but I'm here for you. Whatever you need, whenever you need it, I'm here." Those words meant more to me than I could ever express. It was like, in that moment, I wasn't alone anymore. Mark didn't try to fix things or tell me what to do. He just offered his support, and that was exactly what I needed. We talked for a long time that night, and by the end of the conversation, I felt a little less lost. But it wasn't just Mark. I reached out to my sister Emily too. She's always been the rock in our family, the one who keeps everything together. When I told her what had happened, she was shocked, of course, but she didn't hesitate to offer her support. "Come stay with us for a while," she said. "You don't have to go through this alone." So I did. I packed a bag and spent a few days at Emily's house. Being there, surrounded by family, gave me a sense of comfort that I hadn't felt in weeks. Emily and her husband John made sure I was taken care of, that I had a place to retreat to when the world felt too heavy. They didn't push me to talk about what happened unless I wanted to. They just made sure I knew I was loved, that I had people in my corner. During those days, I started to feel a little bit of myself coming back. The pain was still there, and I knew it would be for a long time. But having people around me who cared, who wanted to help me heal, made all the difference. I realized that I didn't have to go through this alone, that it was okay to lean on others when you're struggling. Conversations with friends and family helped me see things more clearly. They reminded me of who I was before all of this happened, of the strength I had inside me. They didn't let me wallow in self-pity, but they also didn't push me to move on before I was ready. It was a delicate balance, and they handled it with care. One evening, while sitting with Emily and John in their living room, I broke down. All the emotions I had been holding in, the anger, the grief, the fear of the unknown, came rushing out. Emily just hugged me, let me cry, and told me that it was okay to feel this way, that it was part of the healing process. And for the first time, in what felt like forever, I believed her. By the time I left Emily's house, I felt a little stronger, a little more ready to face the world again. I knew the road ahead was going to be tough, but I also knew that I had people who would walk it with me, who would pick me up when I stumbled. It wasn't just about surviving anymore, it was about finding a way to heal, to rebuild my life, and thanks to the support of my friends and family, I knew that I could do it. I didn't have to carry the burden alone, and that gave me the strength to take the next step forward. After leaning on my friends and family, I knew it was time to start picking up the pieces and figure out how to move forward. But healing isn't a straight path. It's a messy, winding road with ups and downs, and I was about to learn that firsthand. The first step was accepting that things would never go back to the way they were. That realization hit hard. I had been clinging to the hope that maybe somehow things could be fixed, that the life I knew could be pieced back together. But deep down, I knew that wasn't possible. The trust was gone, the foundation shattered. I had to start over, and that was terrifying. I threw myself into work, trying to distract myself from the pain. At first, it worked. Staying busy kept my mind off the heartache, but it was just a band-aid, a temporary fix. The truth is, you can't outrun your feelings, no matter how hard you try. Eventually, they catch up to you, and when they did, I felt overwhelmed. There were days when getting out of bed felt like a victory, and others when I could barely make it through the day without breaking down. I started to question everything: my worth, my choices, even the person I had become. It's easy to lose sight of yourself when you've been hurt so deeply. I wondered if I'd ever feel whole again, if I'd ever be able to trust or love someone like I had before. But amid the darkness, I started to find small glimmers of light. I knew I couldn't keep hiding from my emotions, so I began to face them head-on. I started seeing a therapist, something I never thought I'd do. At first, I was hesitant, unsure if talking to a stranger could really help. But those sessions became a lifeline. My therapist helped me unravel the tangled mess of emotions I was carrying around, helped me make sense of the chaos in my head. We talked about the betrayal, yes, but also about my fears, my doubts, and the loss of the future I had envisioned with Luna. We dug deep into my self-esteem, which had taken a massive hit. I realized how much of my identity had been tied to being a good husband, to being part of a happy marriage. Without that, I felt lost. But through those conversations, I started to see that I wasn't defined by what had happened to me. I was more than just a man who had been betrayed. One of the hardest but most important things I learned was how to forgive, not just Luna, but myself. I had been carrying so much guilt, so much blame, wondering what I could have done differently to prevent all this. It took time, but eventually, I began to let go of that. I realized that Luna's actions were her own, and while the pain was real and valid, it wasn't my fault. Learning to forgive myself was a huge step in the healing process. As I began to heal emotionally, I also started to focus on rebuilding other aspects of my life. I reconnected with old friends, people I had lost touch with over the years. I picked up hobbies I had long forgotten. Things like hiking, playing guitar, even cooking. These small acts of self-care helped me rediscover parts of myself that had been buried under the weight of my relationship with Luna. I also made an effort to get back into shape, both physically and mentally. I started going to the gym regularly, not just to feel better about myself, but to channel my emotions into something positive. Working out became a form of therapy in its own right, a way to release the anger, the frustration, and to build myself up again, one step at a time. There were still tough days, days when the memories would sneak up on me and knock the wind out of my sails. But slowly, those days became less frequent. The pain didn't disappear, but it became more manageable, more of a dull ache than a sharp stab. Through all of this, I learned to be kinder to myself, to give myself the grace and patience I needed to heal. I stopped trying to rush the process and allowed myself to feel everything, the good, the bad, and the ugly. I realized that healing isn't about forgetting or pretending the hurt never happened. It's about accepting it, learning from it, and allowing it to transform you into someone stronger, more resilient. One day, I woke up and realized that the heaviness in my chest had lifted, that the dark cloud hanging over me had started to clear. I could breathe again, and for the first time in a long time, I felt hopeful about the future. The journey to healing was far from over, but I had made it through the worst of it. I was beginning to see the light at the end of the tunnel, and with each passing day, I felt more and more like myself again. Maybe even a better version of myself, someone who had been through hell but had come out the other side stronger and more determined to find happiness again. As time went on, I started to find my footing again. The days of overwhelming grief began to lessen, replaced by a cautious sense of hope. I wasn't fully healed, far from it, but I was beginning to see the light at the end of the tunnel. I focused on myself, on rediscovering the things that made me who I was before everything fell apart. I threw myself into work, reconnected with old hobbies, and spent more time with the people who mattered to me. I wasn't looking for anything new. The idea of getting involved with someone else felt impossible, like trying to run before I could even walk again. But life has a funny way of surprising you when you least expect it. It happened on an ordinary Saturday afternoon. I had been invited to a barbecue by a mutual friend, someone who knew what I'd been through, and thought getting out of the house might do me some good. I wasn't particularly excited about going, but I figured it couldn't hurt to be around people, to have some normalcy. That's when I met her, Amelia. She was standing by the grill, laughing with a group of people, holding a plate of food. I don't know what it was about her that caught my attention. Maybe it was her smile, or the way she seemed so comfortable, so at ease with herself and those around her. Whatever it was, I found myself gravitating towards her, drawn in by something I couldn't quite explain. We struck up a conversation, something casual at first. She was warm, friendly, with a kind of energy that felt refreshing. I hadn't realized how much I missed that. Missed feeling like I could talk to someone without the weight of the past hanging over me. As we talked, I learned that she had been through her own set of challenges, different from mine, but painful all the same. There was a quiet strength in her, a resilience that resonated with me. Over the next few weeks, we kept in touch. At first, it was just simple things, text messages, occasional phone calls. There was no pressure, no expectations, just a growing connection between two people who had been through the ringer and were trying to find their way back to happiness. I was careful, though. I didn't want to rush into anything, didn't want to risk getting hurt again, or worse, hurting someone else because I wasn't ready. But Amelia, she was patient. She understood my hesitation, respected the walls I had put up. She never pushed, never tried to force anything. Instead, she let things unfold, naturally, letting me take the lead at my own pace. And slowly, bit by bit, I started to let those walls down. It wasn't easy. There were moments of doubt, times when I questioned if I was really ready to move on, if I could ever trust someone again. But Amelia made it easier. She wasn't trying to replace what I had lost. She was just there, offering something new, something different. As we spent more time together, I found myself opening up in ways I hadn't expected. We talked about everything: our pasts, our fears, our hopes for the future. With Amelia, I didn't feel the need to pretend that everything was okay when it wasn't. I could be honest, vulnerable, and she accepted that without judgment. One evening, as we were sitting on a park bench watching the sunset, she turned to me and asked, "Do you think you could ever love again?" The question hung in the air between us, and for a moment, I didn't know how to respond. But then I realized something: I already was. It wasn't the same as before, and it didn't have to be. This was something new, something that had grown out of the ashes of my old life, and for the first time in a long time, I felt at peace with that. "I think I could," I said, my voice quiet but certain. "I think I already am." Amelia smiled, and in that moment, I knew that I was ready to let the past go, to embrace this new beginning with her. It wasn't about forgetting what had happened, but about allowing myself to heal, to find happiness again in a way I hadn't thought possible. This new chapter wasn't something I had planned, and it didn't come without its challenges. But as we stood up and walked together hand in hand, I realized that maybe, just maybe, I had found something even more valuable than what I had lost. I had found a new kind of love, one built on understanding, patience, and the shared belief that even after the worst storms, the sun could shine again. As my life with Amelia began to take shape, I found myself thinking less and less about Luna. The pain she caused, the betrayal, it was all starting to feel like a distant memory, something that had happened to someone else. I was focused on the present, on building something new and meaningful with Amelia. But then, out of the blue, I heard about what had been happening in Luna's life, and it stirred up emotions I thought I had buried. It came from a mutual friend, someone who had kept in touch with both of us despite everything. We hadn't talked much since the split, but one day, they casually mentioned that Luna was going through a rough patch. At first, I didn't pay much attention, but as they continued, I couldn't help but listen. Apparently, things hadn't been going well for her. The man she had been seeing, the one she'd betrayed me with, had left her not long after I walked out. It turned out that their relationship was built on lies and deceit, and it fell apart just as quickly as it had started. She had tried to pick up the pieces, but nothing seemed to work out. Then there was her job. Luna had always been proud of her career, but according to our friend, she had lost it a few months after our divorce. I don't know all the details, but it sounded like the stress from everything had taken its toll on her performance. She made some bad decisions, burned a few bridges, and before she knew it, she was out. Hearing this, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Part of me, the part that was still hurt, felt a sense of justice, like the universe had balanced the scales in some way. But another part of me, the part that had moved on and started to heal, felt something else. I didn't feel joy or satisfaction at her misfortune. Instead, I felt nothing. Just a quiet acknowledgement that karma had done its work. I thought about the man I used to be, the one who would have wanted to see her suffer, to see her pay for what she had done to me. But I wasn't that man anymore. I had found peace in my own life, in the love and happiness I was building with Amelia. Luna's downfall didn't change that, didn't add or take away from it. It was just another chapter that had come to an end. What surprised me most was that I didn't feel the need to gloat or revel in her misfortune. If anything, I felt a twinge of pity. Luna had made her choices, and now she was living with the consequences. But I had made mine too, and they had led me to a much better place. I realized then that I had truly let go of the anger, the bitterness. I had moved on, and her life, her struggles, they were no longer my concern. Karma had done what it always does, served its own form of justice. But the real victory wasn't in seeing Luna face the consequences of her actions. The real victory was in my own healing, in the life I was now living, free from the shadows of the past. I didn't reach out to Luna. There was no need. Whatever closure I thought I needed, I had already found it within myself. I had built something new, something beautiful with Amelia, and that was all that mattered. The rest, Luna, her choices, her life, was just a reminder of how far I had come and how much better my life was now. In the end, karma had done its work, but I had done mine too, and that was enough. As the days turned into months, I found myself looking at life through a completely different lens. The pain of the past had faded into something that no longer defined me. Instead, it became a distant memory, a reminder of the journey I had been on and how far I had come since then. Amelia and I continued to grow closer. What started as a cautious friendship had blossomed into something deeper, something real. We weren't rushing anything. There was no need to. We were both coming from places of pain and healing, and we understood the importance of taking things slow, of letting our relationship develop naturally. There was a trust between us that I hadn't felt in a long time, a genuine connection that didn't need to be forced. We started making plans for the future, not big, overwhelming plans, but little ones, like taking weekend trips together, trying new things, and exploring what life could be like as a couple. With Amelia, everything felt different. It felt right. One evening, as we sat together on the porch of her house, watching the sunset, I turned to her and said, "You know, for the first time in a long time, I'm really happy." She looked at me, her eyes full of warmth and understanding. "I'm happy too," she said. "I think we've both been through enough to know what really matters. I no longer worried about what might go wrong or what the future might hold. I knew that whatever came our way, I was ready to face it. Not because I had all the answers, but because I had learned that I could survive, that I could thrive, even when life didn't go as planned." And so, as Amelia and I sat there, watching the day slowly turn into night, I felt a deep sense of contentment. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was living. I was loving. And most importantly, I was happy. This new chapter was just beginning, and for the first time in a long time, I was excited to see where it would take me. Whatever lay ahead, I knew I wasn't alone. I had Amelia by my side, and together we were ready to face whatever the future held. The past was behind me. The pain had healed, and the lessons learned had made me stronger. I was ready to embrace the new chapter with open arms, knowing that no matter what, I had finally found the happiness I had been searching for, and that was more than enough.